while people I know may listen, if you're watching this, hearing someone you don't know saying on a video that the same huge groupthink false belief plagues both sides of the climate debate, makes each side see the other as the enemy, and could lead to our downfall whether or not we take the steps recommended to limit climate change. You may want some fact-checking, and in this age of AI, fact-checking is available to everyone, which is why I've included a question and answer session with AI during this video, and providing the questions both in the description and via a linked file to enable you to fact-check with the AI engine of your choice and see that yes, it'll come to the same conclusions. Welcome to the One Finite Planet video on climate groupthink, how to get the answers out of AI, and why seeing reality can have even more impact on our future than the climate debate. First, climate groupthink. Groupthink is when something, whether it's true or not, becomes believed by a majority of people simply because everyone else believes it. Think of ancient religions. Did the Greeks really believe in those gods? Well, it seems they did. This same groupthink applies to many religions, and I'm going to suggest even fundamentalist Christians, as it's my belief that regardless of what's in the Bible being true or not, it's totally unthinkable that anyone could have written back nearly 2,000 years ago about the universe being as we know it today. Even if that's what God could have told those people, could they have really written that and had it believed that there are billions of stars and galaxies and the universe is over 12 billion years old? Given that even if that was the word of God, it couldn't really have been accepted in that day, does it make sense for us to assume that everything is a literal translation? Of course, if it is a literal translation, then the Earth really is only 6,000 years old, so the history that I'm going to talk about is actually not even real. But if you accept that the Earth is as old as science believes, then we get on to the groupthink concept of the Earth, where generally people assume that the Earth has always been, or for most of the time at least, been pretty much like it is today. That humans, had they been around, could have survived potentially billions of years ago, while the reality, which, as will be shown, you can get the answers from AI, is that conditions for humans to live as we do today, with potentially nearly 8 billion people, or even with an environment that enabled the development of civilization, has only been possible for such a short time on Earth that if you map the history of the Earth so far onto one day, we would have had the right conditions that we experience today for 0.22 seconds. Now, humans can survive longer than that. In fact, Homo sapiens have survived over 300,000 years of Stone Age without further developing civilization. We only survived in much smaller numbers, and we just didn't progress. Then suddenly, the right climate conditions come along, and we move to the Neolithic or New Stone Age, to the Iron Age, technology, all the way through to now having AI in just 11,000 years of a unique climate pattern that's never been seen before on Earth. That longer period when humans can survive, that represents about 30 minutes of the clock of history of the Earth. This groupthink is that we see nature as inherently good. We call it Mother Earth as if it would always care for us. When the reality is, yes, nature is wonderful at times, but it's also horrific at times. It goes all the way from assuming foods that are natural can't harm us, as if we've never heard of death cap mushrooms, for example, and the assumption that if we don't ruin the planet will be perfect. It will have conditions that suit us. Well, the planet will survive, but it statistically won't have conditions that'll suit us. The time left that it's possible to have conditions that could suit us, well, that stretches maybe 25 million years out of the 4 billion years remaining for the planet. But the time that is statistically likely to have conditions to suit us, well, if that stretches more than 1,000 years, if that stretches to even 1,000 years, that would be remarkable. We have to be prepared for the climate to change in a way that could be catastrophic for us within the next couple of hundred years and potentially the next 100 years, and in fact have an impact during the time children born today would be alive, even without us poking the bear of natural climate change. There's that much risk of it happening anyway. We have a common enemy, nature, turning against us. This may sound incredible, which brings us to the question of how to get AI to tell you this so you don't have to take my word for it. I have a web page version of 3 conversations with AI to get this data. There are 3 because each time, looking back at it, I found where AI had given wrong answers. In fact, AI quite often gets wrong answers. And until you question it about those wrong answers and ask it to look deeper, then you can be left with answers that are wrong. In fact, AI tends to echo groupthink, or information that's widely available on the web. But it will when you question that groupthink. When you get it to look back at first principles, it sees the errors. But the trouble with that is, if you don't actually know the answer, you might see the wrong answer and simply accept it. Now, I'm not working with DeepSeek because, like the cliche with the goldfish, it forgets everything. And in theory, every time you come back to it, it's like it's seeing you for the first time. Now note, this is the shorter version of questions of a much longer and in-depth session of questions in an alternative video, which will be linked below. Okay, to the questions. For what percentage of Earth's history has it provided a climate conducive to complex or visible life? And as we see, the answer is 12%. Now you might find that confusing, given in science you learnt that life began on Earth at a very early time. But when scientists talk about life and planets, they're actually talking, as with this quote from Professor Brian Cox, about just slime. Not the things we consider life, but instead microbes. Just imagine a Buddhist monk going for an operation, and the doctors, on hearing that he believes in preserving all life, have to tell him, "I'm sorry, but we couldn't operate because sterilising the instruments would actually kill millions and millions of microbes, so it'd be lots of lives just to save your one life. In fact, we don't know how you really live with yourself because your own immune system kills millions of microbes every day." And the truth is that for the first 88% of Earth's history, microbes were the only things that could survive. As on this diagram from Wikipedia, we see that first there was a Hadean eon, which is basically hell on Earth, and the next 2 eons, with temperatures ranging from minus 50 C, which is minus 58 Fahrenheit, through to 70 C, or 158 Fahrenheit. And note, these are not just extremes at some point, this is the global average. And note that even in the period depicted in the movie Ice Age, the global average temperature on Earth was 10 C. 60 C, or almost 100 Fahrenheit, warmer than the minimums during this time. As pointed out in the answer, it was also plagued by low oxygen, climate instability, and volcanic activity and bombardment of meteors from space in the early phase. And we'll come back to what the Earth actually looked like during most of its entire history later in the video. But the next question is, this 12%, the Phanerozoic, the time with visible life, has both icehouse and greenhouse hothouse conditions. So what conditions provide climate, including oxygen levels, conducive to the mammals of today, and how long has Earth provided those conditions? Here it rambles on and gives this answer in quite a bit of detail, which can be read in the web page version linked below, but is summarised in this table with the most important part in the conclusion. While Earth's been suitable for visible life for around 12% of its history, the specific icehouse climate with high oxygen levels that's ideal for large modern mammals has existed for less than 1% of the Earth's history. The very world we think of as normal is a rare and recent phenomenon in the planetary record. But it doesn't stop there. Here, let's get into the next question. What portion of this 1% of the Cenozoic age of mammals have been conducive to Homo sapiens, which, being a large-brained and quite large for a full homotherm mammal that evolved quite recently and requires quite specific environment? While AI seems to get the point about the fact that ecological conditions for a large-brained, generalist technological ape like us have existed for only a small fraction of the age of mammals, it's a little bit vague on the answer in general. And that 0.45% of the age of mammals seems a bit small and is worth a fact check. But the point, our species is incredibly recent, specific, and a fleeting product within this current icehouse world, that's the valid takeaway. But moving on. Next question. What's the most likely reason that in the around 300,000 years of Homo sapiens prior to this current Holocene time, with as far as we know, the same innate intelligence as today did not develop civilization and existed in far lower numbers prior to the Holocene? And this gets to one of our key points. First, there was climate instability, our nature as a hunter-gatherer, but the big one about the Holocene window, and it comes down to the conclusion. The reason Homo sapiens did not develop civilization, it says for over 290,000 years, well, it's quite a bit over 290,000, with estimates now going up to maybe as much as 500,000, but at least over 300,000. Anyway, it's still over 290,000. We had a long time of at least 300,000 years being just as intelligent as we are today, but not developing civilization. And the reason is the world was not ready. The chaotic stop-start climate of the Pleistocene acted as a lid on cultural and technological complexity. In other words, we didn't have the climate to allow the development of civilization. That leads to the next question. Is it safe to say that a return to the Pleistocene conditions, the Pleistocene being the time humans existed prior to this very recent Holocene, where we developed civilization and everything else, to say that a return to Pleistocene conditions would be disastrous for our current complex civilization of 8 billion, and yet could happen at any time, and even that return would be less damaging for us than the alternative of temperatures instead heading towards greenhouse conditions? Okay, so it comes back and looks at both possibilities. First, a return to icehouse, which would lead to total breakdown of our ability to feed 8 billion. Global famine on an unimaginable scale would be inevitable for our current population. But that's the good outcome of climate change. The other alternative is things return to what is actually a more normal temperature for Earth. Remembering that most of the time of visible life, including the entire age of the dinosaurs, has been hothouse conditions, not suitable for mammals in general, let alone very specific mammals like us humans, which are far more adapted to even cooler climates. It goes on to say that it's a false choice because of emissions so far mean that we're only going to hothouse, we're never going back to the previous conditions humans lived in that allowed us to survive but not develop civilization, because we've already done too much to the climate. But we could fix emissions, or things could have changed before we made the emissions, so it's still worthwhile considering both. It puts them down to a catastrophe we're actively choosing versus a catastrophe we have, for now, avoided. But the key point is, both would be disastrous for our current way of life. The end result would be wiping out more than 7 or 8 humans and returning to a population of less than 1 billion very, very quickly. My next question. What fraction of the Earth's history has seen these Holocene conditions? Ideally, as both a percentage and an amount of time if Earth's history is mapped onto one day. And, given it's so atypical, is it safe to say that statistically, even before human emissions, our survival has been like sleeping in a cave with a bear that would wake at any time, even without us poking the bear? Okay, tends to sometimes be a bit of a sycophant in saying the person is brilliant, but still, the rest of the answer is worthwhile. The fraction of the Earth's history is 0.00026%. As it says, that's not a typo. Weirdly enough, even though spelling out that's not a typo, it makes an error and says that the Holocene would occupy the last 12.7 seconds of the Earth's day, which is wrong, and I ask her to check, and that's coming. But the rest of the answer still applies. The sleeping bear analogy, yes, the current time is profoundly atypical. The Holocene is not just a random period, it's the peak of a rare stable phase within an already rare icehouse climate. The big point is, the Earth we see today, the only one we've known throughout history, is not the normal Earth. Earth's default state is hothouse. For 80 to 85% of its history, Earth has been in a greenhouse hothouse type state, with no polar ice caps and temperatures too warm for humans. Icehouses are rare and unstable. There's only been a couple ever. But even more specific than the icehouse condition are unstable, being an interglacial within an icehouse, that's even rarer. Within this unstable icehouse, though relatively warm for an icehouse, stable interglacial like the Holocene, are brief and they typically last only 10 to 15,000 years before the ice returns. Remember, the one we're in now is already over 12,000 years old. Had it ended at 10,000 years, civilization would have collapsed 2,000 years ago, with the conclusion, even without human influence, we are living on borrowed time. I mean, it uses the analogy of the tragic irony is by poking the bear with massive CO2 emissions, we haven't prevented the bear from waking, we've injected it with adrenaline and steroids. But anyway, the conclusion. Statistically, a stable, warm, intergalactic period like the Holocene is one of the rarest and most fleeting states in Earth's climate history. Our entire existence as a civilized species has been on a precarious, statistically anomalous gift, a brief moment of calm in a stormy 4.5 billion year history. We weren't just sleeping in the bear's cave, we were thriving in a golden age that was destined by natural rhythms of the planet to end abruptly. Okay, so my next question is just on that calculation. You said each second represents 52,000 years and then the Holocene would be 12 seconds, which is an answer about 60 times too big. Don't know exactly where it went wrong. Anyway, it fixes it and gives us a great clock of our 24-hour day, with the key point that the climate conditions we need for civilization represent just 0.222 seconds of Earth as a 24-hour period. And the whole of human history occurs in the last half of those 0.22 seconds in just under 0.1 of a second. The only reference we have when we talk about, oh, this is what's happened in all of history, is talking about the equivalent of 0.1 of a second of a day and trying to characterise what happens in the whole day based on that. Okay, next question. Is it also fair to say that failure to acknowledge our civilization's dependence on such a rare and statistically unlikely state of the environment produces problems for both sides of climate debate and creates what can be seen as holes in arguments of those proposing limited emissions? In other words, both sides of the debate screwed by starting with the assumption that the planet is naturally friendly to us. And even AI comes out and says most people, including many advocates, implicitly assume the Holocene, that 0.2 seconds of the Earth's history, is normal or the default state of the planet. This leads to arguments framed around saving the planet or returning to normal, which is not only screwed up and wrong, it leads to skeptics seeing the flaws. They can rightly point out Earth's climate history has always changed, CO2 levels have been higher, and the planet will endure. We're not saving the planet. We're saving us. And even AI came out and said that. The stronger argument, we're not saving the planet. We're preserving the only known state that can support our global civilization. The planet will be fine. It's spent over 85% of its history in a hothouse state. And when they say 85% of its history in a hothouse state, that's 80% of the time of visible life, which is only 12% of the time of the entire Earth. It's our agriculture and our coastal megacities and our complex society that's on the line, not the planet. The idea of trying to sound noble, we're saving the planet, just misses the whole point, and here it is again. The misplaced reassurance from greener Earths, a common counter-argument, is that a warmer, CO2-richer world will be greener and better for plants. And that's true. It'll just kill us. The planet can be better off without us. The other point being that people underestimate the scale of the threat. Assuming that the Earth's normally fine and normally would support us makes the threat logically crazy. How could we disturb a planet that's normally in this wonderful state for us to live on? And the truth is, we can't. We're not doing much to the planet at all. We're just tipping the scale of the planet to return to a more natural state. As it comes down to its conclusion, your insight's correct. Failure to ground the climate debate in deep time context of Earth's history is a critical failure of communication and strategy. It allows the conversation about small changes and abstract concepts rather than the fundamental truth that human civilization is a delicate and recent phenomenon built entirely within a fleeting golden moment of climate stability. It then goes on playing climate advocate, but the point is still valid. Next question, getting to the end, and that just ending emissions is not enough to assure our survival. Our survival will be under threat, although delayed, even without emissions. And the lessons we're learning are not just about the threat, but about what manipulates climate, which could be the key to our survival. In other words, there could be a positive side here. And it breaks it down. Ending emissions is necessary, but not sufficient for long-term survival. Any plan based solely around net zero is committing us to allowing human civilization to end. Now, there might be a valid argument that we have to do net zero first, but really, doing one thing at a time, given the risk, not a great idea. Point 2, we have been learning what manipulates climate. And point 3, this knowledge could be, well, in fact, eventually must be, the key to our survival. Because natural climate change is actually inevitable, which is pursued in another video, but take that as a given for now. This AI comes up to the idea that our civilization journey can be seen in 3 acts. Innocence, like a child thinking they'll live forever. The crisis, now realising we're mortal and if everything's left alone, we're going to die. Act 3, the stewardship, realising that if we do things the right way, at least our children can live on. And now returning to that point of what does the Earth actually look like? And a person arriving on Earth from space during the first almost 88% would not see any of the visible life we usually think of as life, and would certainly need a spacesuit. And while the need for a spacesuit during the Phanerozoic, or that remaining 12%, would be less, it would still be, for a percentage of time, be needed for comfort and at times for appropriate oxygen. And it comes down to it. If we found an Earth-like planet, chances are, when we got there, it'd be lifeless and we'd still need spacesuits on the surface. Because that's what we need almost all of the time on Earth. For the first 88%, spacesuit mandatory. It comes up with atmosphere, no oxygen, the view, no plants, no animals, no forests, a bit weak. The verdict, spacesuit required. Fails to mention the radiation that would happen because of the oxygen-free atmosphere, which would also kill you without a spacesuit. But anyway, let that go. It divides it into 3 periods: spacesuit required, spacesuit advised, and Holocene-like conditions, which are pretty rare. And of course, depending on where you land, a t-shirt won't be enough. But at least during these times, there'd be a place you could land where a t-shirt would be enough. I noted that it put the Carboniferous Permian as saying the air was breathable with oxygen levels at 31 to 35%, and being a bit of a nitpicker, I picked it up on that and said, are humans okay with 31 to 35% O2 without medical supervision? And the short answer is no, we're not. Meaning even these answers given are a little bit generous on the likelihood that if we found an Earth-like planet, there's a chance we could step out of a spaceship without a spacesuit. Sorry, film industry. This is just skipping through the oxygen requirements. So to return to your visitor's guide, a human landing in a high oxygen Carboniferous period would not be able to simply take off their helmet and breathe easy. While they wouldn't suffocate, they'd be at constant risk of seizures, lung damage, and a single spark from their equipment could ignite a global firestorm. Anyway, time to get back to overall conclusions, which are: no, human impact alone isn't going to threaten our existence, much less that of the planet. Although waking the bear could easily prematurely trigger natural climate change that, combined with the impact from our emissions up to that time, could lead to climate change that at the very least, within 50 to 100 years, disrupts civilization, being able to support even close to 1 billion, meaning deaths for most of those born today or their children. And even if it happens simply naturally, at some point, temperatures are going to climb back to greenhouse conditions, will become extinct, have way over 99% of species of the Phanerozoic already, and all will naturally become extinct at some point. With that rise in temperature that makes us extinct, the planet would recover. Any impact from humans will only remain for a fleeting moment. And in greenhouse conditions, for a short time at least, most likely the Earth will support more total life than it does now. Just not us. The planet's not under threat. It could be better off. Our mission isn't save the planet, or even just stop poking the bear, but also to intervene and prevent that the planet naturally changes to a climate that doesn't suit us. It's more to save us and some of the other species we particularly like from the planet. And to do that, while allowing the best standard of living in the interim. Not so noble, but at least genuine. Subscribe for other videos, including discussion on how to achieve this more genuine goal at the lowest cost.